I've replayed that night in my head more times than I can count, always stopping at the same question. Why did I pull over? If I had kept driving for another 2 minutes, just 2, I am convinced none of this would have happened. I'm 34 years old, British, rational to the point of irritation. I work with signals and data for a living. Frequencies, noise, interference, things people can't see but can measure. I don't scare easily, and I don't believe in stories without evidence. At least I didn't. That night I was driving alone through a remote stretch of northern Scotland, taking a back road I'd never used before. It was meant to save time. Instead, it erased it. The kind of road where the asphalt narrows, the shoulders disappear, and the land stretches out into black nothingness. No houses, no lights, no sound except the engine and the wind brushing against the car. There was no moon. The sky was sealed shut with clouds. A heavy mist rolled across the road in slow waves, swallowing my headlights and spitting them back at me in pale white glare. My phone had lost signal hours earlier. The sat-nav had given up entirely, frozen on a blank grey screen like it had decided this place simply didn't exist. That should have unsettled me more than it did. What I remember most clearly is the silence, not the peaceful kind. A silence so deep it feels deliberate, as if the landscape itself is holding its breath. Even the engine sounded wrong, too loud, too alone. I turned the radio on just to hear another human voice, but all I got was static, thick, aggressive static. I turned it off again. That was when I noticed the feeling, the sense of being observed. I know how that sounds. I would have dismissed it myself, but it wasn't fear, not at first. It was awareness, like stepping into a room and knowing someone has just stepped out, the air still warm where they stood. My shoulders tightened without me telling them to. I checked the mirrors. Nothing, just mist and darkness. Then the sound started, a faint clicking from the front of the car. Soft at first, almost polite. Click, 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 perfectly rhythmic. I slowed down, listening. The sound stayed. I pressed the brakes lightly. It stopped. I accelerated again. It came back, sharper now, more insistent, as if responding to me. I told myself it was debris, a loose panel, something harmless. But the noise followed no mechanical logic I understood, and that bothered me more than the sound itself. The click turned into a dull metallic tap, and that's when I saw the lay-by ahead, a small patch of gravel carved into the side of the road. My instincts screamed, "Don't stop." My reason argued back that breaking down out here would be worse. Reason won. I pulled in. The moment the car stopped, the sound vanished. Not faded, vanished. The engine idled, alone in the fog. When I switched it off, the silence crashed down so hard it made my ears ring. I sat there for several seconds, hands gripping the steering wheel, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. No signal, no passing cars, no lights behind me or ahead, just open land and mist. I got out. Cold hit me immediately, wet, invasive cold that sank through my jacket like it wasn't there. My breath fogged in front of my face, gravel crunched under my shoes, impossibly loud. I opened the bonnet and stared at the engine bay without seeing it. Everything looked normal, too normal. That's when I felt it again, not watched, expected. I lowered the bonnet slowly and turned toward the edge of the lay-by. At first I thought it was a trick of the mist, a darker patch where fog thickened. Then it moved. A figure stood just beyond the gravel, half hidden by drifting white, tall, thin, completely still. It wasn't walking toward me. It wasn't retreating. It was simply there, upright, as if it had been standing in that exact spot long before I arrived. My heart began to pound, not fast, but heavy, deliberate beats. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding wrong in my own ears. No answer. I reached for my phone out of reflex. The screen lit up, useless, no service. As I lowered it, the glow briefly illuminated the figure's outline, and something about its proportions made my stomach drop. The limbs were too long, the posture too precise. No shifting weight, no breath. Then it spoke. Not loudly, not aggressively, calm, measured. Close enough that I felt the vibration of the sound in my chest. In flawless English. My accent. "You're not supposed to be recording yet," it said. And in that moment, before fear even had time to fully arrive, I understood one terrifying truth. Whatever was standing in front of me had been aware of me long before I became aware of it. For a second, or maybe longer, I didn't react at all. My body simply refused to accept what my ears had just processed. The words were clear, calm, grammatically perfect, but the meaning lagged behind, like my mind was buffering. "You're not supposed to be recording yet." I hadn't even realized my thumb was hovering near the phone screen. The device felt suddenly heavy in my hand, incriminating. I slipped it back into my pocket slowly, deliberately, as if the motion itself mattered. "I'm not recording," I said. My voice cracked on the last word. I hated that. The figure stepped forward, just enough for the mist to thin around it. Not fully into view, never fully. The fog seemed to cling to it, shaping itself around a tall, narrow frame. "I know," it replied. "You were about to." That was when fear finally caught up with me. Not panic. Panic is messy and loud. This was colder, sharper. The kind of fear that makes every detail feel painfully vivid. The damp air on my face, the slow pulse in my neck, the faint hum in my ears that hadn't been there before. "Who are you?" I asked. The question felt stupid the moment it left my mouth, as if there were a normal answer waiting. The figure tilted its head slightly, not in a human way, more like an adjustment, a recalibration. "That's a complicated question," it said, "but you'd be most comfortable calling me an observer." An observer. The word landed with weight. I took an involuntary step back, my heel crunching into gravel. The sound echoed far too loudly. "You shouldn't have stopped," it continued, voice steady, almost gentle. This wasn't meant to be an interaction. I glanced toward my car. The door was still open, interior light glowing weakly, casting a pale rectangle onto the ground. 10 steps, maybe fewer. I could run. The thought flashed through my mind like a reflex. But I didn't move, because some part of me, some deeply buried rational part, was trying to understand, to analyze, to classify what was happening instead of feeling it. "You sound..." I hesitated. "You sound human." The figure seemed to consider that. "I learned your language carefully," it said. "Accent included. Precision matters. It makes you listen longer." That sent a chill straight down my spine. It stepped forward again. This time the mist parted enough for me to see more. The outline sharpened, not into clarity, but into wrongness. The limbs were elongated, yes, but not grotesquely so. Just enough to unsettle. Its posture was upright, balanced in a way that felt engineered rather than natural. The face remained indistinct, as if my eyes refused to focus on it properly. I could sense features without defining them. Eyes, but too reflective. Skin, but too smooth. Or maybe too still. "How do you know my accent?" I asked. A pause, brief, calculated. "Because I know where you grew up," it said, "and where you moved when you were 19. I know which words you pronounce sharply and which ones soften when you're tired." My mouth went dry. "That's not possible." It didn't argue. Instead, it said my name, not shouted, not whispered, spoken the way someone does when they're trying not to draw attention in a quiet room. I felt the blood drain from my face. "You've been monitoring me?" I asked. "Not you specifically," it replied. "You are incidental, but your patterns intersected with this location at the wrong moment." Patterns? Then why talk to me at all? I demanded. My fear was curdling into something else now, anger maybe, or the desperate need to assert control. "If this wasn't meant to happen, why are you still standing there?" Another slight head tilt. Because you noticed, it said, and because curiosity is one of your species' most dangerous traits. The air seemed to vibrate faintly, like a low electrical hum just beyond hearing. I felt pressure behind my eyes, a dull ache forming at the base of my skull. You're not the first human to stand here, it continued, but you are the first in some time to ask the correct questions. I swallowed. How long have you been here? I asked, a longer pause this time. Here? It echoed. Or here? Before I could clarify, it added, longer than your recorded history, shorter than you'd find comforting. My heart pounded. My instinct screamed that every answer it gave only raised worse questions. I glanced again toward the car, the open door, the fragile promise of speed and distance. I think I should leave, I said. The figure did not block my path. It didn't move at all. That would be wise, it agreed. But before you do, you should understand something. I waited, breath held. You believe you encountered me by chance, it said. You did not. You were observed long before tonight, evaluated, and permitted to continue until now. My skin prickled. Permitted? I repeated. Yes, it said calmly, and that permission can be withdrawn. The words hung in the air, heavier than the mist. And for the first time since stepping out of my car, I understood that whatever stood in front of me was not curious about me in the way I was curious about it. It was assessing whether I was a problem. The word permission echoed in my head long after it was spoken, bouncing around my thoughts like a trapped insect. I realized then that my breathing had become shallow, controlled, not because I was calm, but because something deep inside me was trying not to provoke whatever stood in front of me. Withdrawn, I repeated quietly. You're saying you can decide whether I... What? Walk away from this? The figure didn't answer immediately. The mist shifted, curling around its legs in slow, deliberate motions, as if even the fog was reacting to it. I'm saying, it replied at last, that outcomes are guided. You call it chance because it comforts you. That irritated me, not enough to overpower fear, but enough to push back. You keep talking like you understand us, I said, like you understand me. I understand you better than you think, it said. Then it proved it. You still feel responsible for your mother's fall, it continued calmly, even though the doctors told you it was no one's fault. You replay the sound of the phone hitting the floor more than the sound of her voice. My chest tightened so abruptly it felt like a physical blow. That's private, I said. You couldn't know that. You were 27, it went on, unbothered. You were distracted, tired. You promised you'd call back. You never did. The night seemed to tilt. I had to steady myself by shifting my weight, gravel biting into the soles of my shoes. Stop, I said. It didn't. You avoid thinking about it by filling your life with noise, work, movement, logic. You tell yourself you prefer facts because emotions introduce error, but that's not the truth, is it? I clenched my fists. The truth, it said softly, is that silence frightens you, because in silence you remember. I stared at the shape in front of me, my mind scrambling for explanations, cold reading, psychological profiling. A lucky guess. Any explanation that didn't involve the impossible. You could have researched me, I said. Data breaches happen all the time. Yes, it agreed easily, they do. The simplicity of that response unsettled me more than denial would have. But not like this, it added. Your species leaves trails everywhere, digital, emotional, biological. You broadcast more than you realize. You think privacy is something you can switch on and off. A faint pressure began to build in my ears again, the same subtle hum I'd felt earlier, like standing too close to unseen machinery. You said I wasn't meant to be here, I said. Then why does it feel like you expected me? Another pause, longer this time. I expected someone, it said carefully. Your presence was statistically unlikely, but not unprecedented. What does that mean? It means, it replied, that this location intersects with your kind more often than you understand, usually without awareness, usually without memory. My stomach twisted. You make people forget? I asked. Memory is malleable, it said. Yours especially. You edit yourselves constantly. We simply assist. That was the moment my fear shifted into something darker. You're saying people have been here before, I said, my voice low. People like me. Yes. And what happened to them? The figure didn't move, but the air around it seemed to tighten. Most continued their lives, it said, with gaps, with dreams that felt unusually vivid, with a sense of having missed something important. I swallowed hard. And the ones who didn't? A beat. They became complications. The word landed like a threat, even though it was delivered without emotion. I thought about the missing hikers I'd read about over the years, the unexplained disappearances that never quite made sense, the stories people laughed off because they didn't fit neatly into reality. You've been watching us for how long? I asked. It looked past me then, toward the dark stretch of road, as if my question were too small to face directly. Your civilizations rise and fall, it said. Your languages change, your borders shift, but your impulses remain remarkably consistent. Curiosity, fear, violence, hope. I felt suddenly very small. You talk about us like we're an experiment, I said. Another pause. No, it replied, experiments end. The hum in the air deepened, vibrating faintly through my chest. I realized my hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the growing certainty that I was standing far too close to something vast and indifferent. You said I was permitted, I said. Why? The figure turned its attention fully back to me. For the first time, I felt like I was being truly examined, not my thoughts, not my memories, but me. Because you noticed, it said again, and because you are standing at the edge of a decision you don't yet understand. What decision? A sound escaped it then. Not a voice, not quite. A low resonance, almost like amusement filtered through machinery. Whether you leave this place unchanged, it said, or whether you become a variable. The mist thickened suddenly, pressing in around us. And variables, it added, are always monitored more closely. In that moment, I understood something with terrifying clarity. This encounter wasn't about contact, it was about classification, and I had no idea which category I was about to fall into. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until my lungs began to burn. The fog had thickened so quietly, I hadn't noticed the change at first, but suddenly the world felt smaller, compressed. My car's interior light was still on, a weak yellow rectangle in the mist, and it looked miles away even though it was only a few steps. The figure, the observer, stood between me and the verge, but it wasn't blocking me. That was the worst part. It didn't need to. A variable, I repeated. The words tasted wrong. What exactly does that mean? It didn't answer directly. Instead, it asked a question that made my stomach drop. Do you know why humans film? It said. I blinked. To prove things, I replied. To remember. To possess, it corrected calmly. To turn an experience into an object. To make it tradable. I swallowed hard. The air was cold and wet, but my mouth felt dry as paper. I wasn't trying to trade anything, I said, though even as I spoke I knew that wasn't entirely true. Not in the modern world. A video is always currency. Attention, status, validation, proof, a weapon against disbelief. The figure's head tilted minutely, as if it was listening to the thoughts behind my words. "You weren't trying to trade," it said, "yet, but you would have." A pulse of irritation flared in me, thin, desperate defiance. "You don't know me," I snapped. It said my full name again, first, middle, last, without hesitation. Then it added something no stranger should have ever been able to add. "And you still keep the boarding pass from your first flight alone," it said, "folded inside the back of a drawer you never open because you like the feeling that there was a moment you escaped your own life." My legs felt weak. I forced myself not to show it. I took a step toward the car. Gravel crunched. The sound was swallowed immediately by the fog, as if the night itself was absorbing evidence. The figure didn't move. "You can leave," it said, as if reading my intention. "This interaction can end." My heart hammered. "Can," I repeated, "not will." The figure's voice remained even, patient. "Your species likes certainty, but certainty is a luxury." I stared at the vague shape of its face, trying to focus, trying to force my eyes to interpret it properly. Every time I thought I saw the outline of features, the mist seemed to blur them again. It was like my brain refused to lock onto the details, like looking at something too bright, too strange, and instinctively turning away. "What are you?" I asked again, quieter this time. The observer made a slow motion with one hand, an oddly precise gesture, not quite human, not quite robotic. "Categories are how you make fear manageable," it said. "If you can name something, you can imagine controlling it." "And you don't want me to name you," I said. "I don't want you to record me," it replied. That brought me back to the sentence that started all of this. "You said I wasn't supposed to be recording yet," I said. "Why yet?" The fog shifted, and for a moment I felt like the world leaned closer to listen. "Because there is a sequence," it said, "and you are early." A cold prickling ran over my scalp. A sequence of what? It looked past me again, toward the road I'd been driving, toward the dark distance where the highlands swallowed everything. "Events," it said. "You experience them as isolated incidents, but they cluster, they accelerate." My mouth went numb. "Are you saying something is coming?" The observer's voice softened, not with kindness, but with that strange, deliberate calm it wore like a mask. "I'm saying you already feel it," it replied. "In your news, in your networks, in the way your systems begin to fail more often, in the way your people begin to mistrust their own senses." I thought about the videos online, lights in the sky, strange sounds, sudden blackouts, stories dismissed as hoaxes. I'd always assumed there was a rational explanation, a trick of perspective, or a drone, or someone craving attention. But this thing was standing in front of me, speaking like it had rehearsed human tone for years. "What happens if people know?" I asked. The observer didn't hesitate. "Your species destabilizes," it said, "not because the truth is violent, but because your minds are—" I felt a surge of anger. "We're not children." "No," it said, "children adapt. You cling." A beat passed. The hum in the air returned, low and steady. The pressure behind my eyes sharpened, as if something were tightening a band around my skull. Then it said, in the flattest tone yet, "You have approximately 40 seconds to decide what kind of memory you want." I froze. "What?" 40 seconds, it repeated as if discussing whether to leave with nothing, to leave with fragments, or to leave with a burden you'll spend the rest of your life trying to make others believe. I could barely breathe. "You're threatening me," I said. It paused, just a fraction. "No," it replied. "I am clarifying the consequences of attention." My hand drifted toward my pocket where the phone rested, suddenly dangerous, like a loaded weapon. I didn't pull it out. I didn't dare. "Why tell me any of this?" I demanded. If you don't want exposure, why give me a warning at all? The observer's answer came slowly, like it mattered. Because you were already filming, it said. Not with your device. My skin crawled. With what then? I asked, voice barely audible. It leaned forward slightly. The mist around it stirred, as if disturbed by heat. With your mind, it said. And minds are harder to erase. And then it added, almost casually, almost like an afterthought, also, you are not the only one here. The words punched the air out of me. I turned instinctively, scanning the fog, my eyes wide, searching for movement I couldn't see. And somewhere beyond the reach of the car's weak light, the mist shifted again, as if something else had just adjusted its position. When it said, I wasn't the only one there, something inside me fractured. I spun slowly, scanning the fog beyond the reach of my car's interior light, my eyes strained, desperate to impose shapes where there were none. The mist moved. Of course it did, but now every subtle shift felt intentional, deliberate, like breathing I couldn't hear. I don't see anyone, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. That doesn't mean anything, the observer replied. Your vision is limited by design. I hated how calmly it spoke, as if this were a lecture, not a warning delivered in the middle of nowhere by something that shouldn't exist. Then why tell me? I asked. Why say that at all? Because awareness alters behavior, it said. Yours is escalating. The hum in the air deepened, a low vibration that seemed to pass through my bones rather than my ears. I felt suddenly lightheaded, like the ground beneath me had lost a fraction of its solidity. I took another step toward the car. Leave, it said again. This remains your best option. I stopped. My hand hovered inches from the doorframe. I could feel the warmth leaking from the interior, a small pocket of safety, normality, leather seats, dust on the dashboard, everything familiar and fragile. You said 40 seconds, I said. How many are left? A pause. 17. My pulse spiked. 17 until what? I demanded. Until this location resets, it said. Until your presence becomes more costly than convenient. Costly. I laughed, one sharp, breathless sound. You talk like I'm a file you can just close. In many ways, it replied, you are. Something snapped in me then, not courage, not bravery, stubbornness. The same instinct that had made me pull over instead of keep driving, the need to know. I need proof, I said. The observer turned its attention fully back to me. The pressure in the air intensified, like a storm gathering without wind. You don't, it said. You want validation. Same thing, I shot back. No, it corrected. Proof satisfies logic. Validation feeds identity. You want others to confirm that what you experienced was real, so you don't have to carry it alone. The words hit far too close to home. I felt my phone against my thigh, solid and familiar, a tool, a witness. The one thing that could anchor this nightmare to reality. You said you're afraid of exposure, I said. If that's true, why not just stop me? It tilted its head again, that precise, unsettling movement. Because intervention escalates scrutiny, it said, and because your species has a habit of misunderstanding resistance. I didn't fully understand what it meant, but the implication was clear enough. I slipped my hand into my pocket. The observer's posture changed instantly, not dramatically, just enough. A tightening, a subtle alignment of its frame, like something bracing itself. I would advise against that, it said. You said I had a choice, I replied, my fingers brushing the edge of the phone. This is it. The hum spiked sharply, stabbing through my skull. I gasped, pain blooming behind my eyes, but I didn't stop. My thumb slid across the screen. The phone vibrated softly as the camera activated. The effect was immediate. The mist around us rippled outward as if a stone had been dropped into invisible water. The observer's outline wavered, not blurred but misaligned, like layers failing to sync. For the first time, it made a sound that wasn't language, a low, resonant tone that set my teeth on edge. "You are altering parameters," it said, voice strained for the first time. "Stop." I raised the phone, heart hammering so hard I could barely keep it steady. The screen showed something, not clearly. The image stuttered, pixels smearing and correcting themselves. The figure appeared and disappeared in fragments, its shape refusing to resolve. "What are you?" I demanded, louder now, panic and adrenaline colliding. "What are you hiding?" The pressure in the air became unbearable. My vision tunneled. The hum rose into a piercing whine. "Recording us is not neutral," it said sharply. "Images propagate. They invite attention. They create patterns. And what happens when people see?" I shouted. The observer's answer came through clenched stillness. "They come closer," it said, "and closer inspection is dangerous." For a split second, just one, I thought I saw it clearly. Not a face, not eyes, layers, as if what stood before me wasn't a single being, but overlapping states, slightly out of phase with one another. Reality struggling to agree on what it was allowed to show me. Then the phone screen flickered violently. A loud crack split the air. Not thunder, not sound, but sensation. The world lurched. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the device. The observer recoiled, its outline stretching unnaturally, as if pulled in two directions at once. "This is why you are monitored," it said, voice tight. "Curiosity without restraint destabilizes systems." The mist surged inward, swallowing the space between us. My ears rang, my knees buckled. Through the chaos, I heard its final warning, clear, unmistakable. "If you continue, you will not leave with just a memory." The phone in my hand buzzed violently, the screen flashing error messages I'd never seen before. And in that moment, staring at a device that suddenly felt like a live wire, I realized I'd crossed the line it had been trying, patiently, to keep me from seeing. I was no longer an observer, I was evidence. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the gravel with a dull crack, screen still glowing, still shaking as if something inside it were trying to escape. I barely noticed. My knees gave way, and I caught myself on the edge of the car door, gasping, the air suddenly too thin to breathe properly. The hum was everywhere now, not just in my ears, inside me, in my chest. My teeth vibrated, my vision pulsed in time with it. The world flickering between sharp clarity and warped distortion like a corrupted video stream. "Stand up," the observer said. The command wasn't shouted, but my body reacted as if it had been. Muscles tightened. I straightened involuntarily, heart slamming against my ribs. "You are experiencing feedback," it continued. "Remain upright to reduce neurological stress." "You did this," I said through clenched teeth. "Yes," it replied, "and no." The mist churned violently now, circling us instead of drifting. The road behind me no longer looked flat. It curved slightly upward at the edges, as if perspective itself were bending. My car's interior light flickered, dimmed, then flared brighter than it should have. "What's happening to me?" I asked. The observer took a step back. For the first time, it created distance rather than closing it. "You forced an overlap," it said. "Your recording device interacted with a process not designed for your sensory framework." "That doesn't mean anything," I snapped. "It means," it clarified, "that you are perceiving more layers than your cognition evolved to handle." Pain bloomed behind my eyes, sharp and sudden. Images flashed uninvited across my mind, patterns, symbols, movements that didn't resolve into meaning. I saw shapes folding into themselves, spaces connecting that shouldn't, like maps of a world that didn't obey Euclidean rules. I screamed and clutched my head. "Stop!" I begged. "Make it stop!" The observer raised one elongated hand. The hum dropped in intensity, not gone, but bearable. I sagged against the car again, sweat cold on my skin despite the freezing air. You are not meant to perceive us directly for extended periods, it said. That limitation is protective. Protective of who? I demanded. A pause. Both. That answer chilled me more than anything else it had said. I forced myself to look at it again. The mist still refused to fully reveal its form, but now I could see instability. The outline shuddered faintly, as if my act of recording had damaged something fundamental. You're hurt, I said. It did not deny it. Your device created a fixed reference, it explained. A snapshot of a dynamic state. That creates strain. Like shining a light on something that shouldn't be lit, I muttered. Yes, it said, or like naming something that prefers to remain undefined. My gaze dropped to the phone lying on the gravel. The screen was cracked now, spiderweb fractures radiating from the corner. The camera app was still open, frozen on a frame of visual noise, static threaded with darker shapes that hurt to look at too long. Did it record you? I asked. It recorded an approximation, the observer replied, enough to be problematic. A surge of panic hit me. Then delete it. I cannot, it said. Your technology does not recognize my authority. That's ridiculous. It is inconvenient, it corrected. The hum surged again, briefly, and I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. Others will notice the anomaly, it continued, if the data propagates. I haven't uploaded anything, I said quickly. No signal, you know that. Yes, it said, but signals return, networks reconnect, and your kind shares before it reflects. I thought of cloud backups, automatic syncing, apps that copied files without asking. My stomach dropped. You're saying it's already out of my control, I whispered. It is becoming so, it replied. The observer turned its attention toward the road, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Additional entities are adjusting their focus, it said. Your choice has narrowed. My choice? I snapped. You told me to leave. And you chose to record, it said calmly. Every action collapses options. I clenched my jaw. So, what happens now? The figure faced me again. For a moment, just a moment, the mist thinned enough that I thought I saw something like eyes. Not eyes as we understand them, but points of attention, weight, presence. Now, it said, we decide how much you are allowed to remember. Fear surged through me. You said minds are harder to erase. Yes, it agreed, which is why suppression is rarely total. That's not an answer. It is the only one you're getting, it said. The hum began to fade, slowly, like a machine powering down. The air grew heavier, more normal. The road flattened. The mist loosened its grip. Get in your vehicle, the observer instructed. Drive when you can. Do not return to this location. And you? I asked. A strange pause followed. I will remain, it said, and I will be reviewed. That sentence lingered ominously. As I reached for the car door, one last question burned in me. You said I wasn't the only one here, I said. Where are the others? The observer didn't look away from the fog. Close enough, it replied, to have felt you record. The implication hit me like ice water. I slid into the driver's seat, hands shaking, heart racing, and slammed the door shut. As the engine turned over, coughing back to life, I caught one final glimpse of the mist outside. This time, it wasn't empty. It was crowded with subtle movements, shifts and disturbances that suggested presence without form. And as I pulled back onto the road, fleeing into the darkness, one terrifying certainty settled into my bones. Whatever I had filmed wasn't the most dangerous thing that night. The most dangerous thing was that I had been noticed. I drove for nearly an hour before I trusted my hands enough to loosen my grip on the steering wheel. The road unwound beneath the headlights like nothing unusual had happened, which somehow made it worse. Trees, curves, occasional road signs, normality performing flawlessly while my thoughts lagged behind reality. I kept checking the mirrors, not because I expected to see something, because I expected not to, and didn't trust that expectation anymore. Every time a shadow stretched strangely, or the mist thickened, my pulse jumped. My body had learned a new rule. Isolation no longer meant safety. When I finally reached a village, real lights, real buildings, I pulled over and sat there shaking. I didn't turn off the engine. I didn't get out. I just breathed and watched people walk past the end of the street, laughing, checking their phones, living inside a version of the world that suddenly felt incomplete. I waited for the fear to fade. It didn't. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, fragments surfaced, patterns that didn't resolve, the pressure in my skull, the sense of something aligning just out of sight. When I did drift off, I dreamed of layers peeling back endlessly, like pages that refused to stop turning. I woke with my heart racing, convinced someone had been standing in the room. There never was. At least, not that I could see. The next morning, I checked my phone. The video was still there. I hadn't touched it since dropping the phone on the gravel. The screen was cracked but functional. With trembling fingers, I opened the gallery. The file sat innocently among ordinary photos, receipts, landscapes, a blurred shot from a cafe weeks earlier. The timestamp was correct. The duration was wrong. 12 seconds. I was certain I'd been recording longer than that, much longer. Yet when I pressed play, the footage was unusable. The image pulsed between static and shadow, the audio a distorted hum punctuated by faint clicks. No clear figure, no unmistakable proof. Just enough ambiguity to drive a person mad. But something was there. If I watched closely, too closely, shapes suggested themselves, not consistently, not reliably, as if the video refused to be interpreted the same way twice. My eyes watered. A dull headache formed almost immediately. I shut it off. That was when my laptop chimed. A notification, cloud sync complete. My stomach dropped. I logged in frantically, checking backup, storage folders, anything that might confirm my worst fear. The file was there too, copied automatically, quietly, without my consent. It had already existed in 2 places. Soon, it would exist in more. I considered deleting it. I really did, but the observer's words echoed in my head. Suppression is rarely total. Deleting a file doesn't erase an experience. It doesn't erase curiosity, and it doesn't erase whatever had already taken notice. That afternoon, the first anomaly happened. My internet cut out briefly, nothing unusual. But when it returned, my browser opened to a blank page instead of my home page. No error message, just white. When text finally loaded, it wasn't a site I recognized. It wasn't even formatted properly. Just a single sentence, centered on the screen. You are experiencing after effects. This is expected. My breath caught. I refreshed the page. It vanished. I checked the history. Nothing. I told myself it was a glitch, a prank, malware. Anything but what my instincts screamed. But the feeling returned, the same one from the road. That sense of being accounted for. As if a ledger somewhere had updated, and my name now carried an annotation. Over the next few days, the world felt subtly misaligned. Streetlights flickered as I passed beneath them. Devices lagged for a fraction of a second longer than they should. People sometimes paused mid-sentence around me, eyes unfocused, before continuing as if nothing had happened. Once, in a cafe, a man at the next table turned toward me suddenly and said, "You shouldn't have recorded." Then he blinked, frowned and apologized, claiming he thought he was talking to someone else. I left without finishing my coffee. I stopped telling myself I was imagining things after the 3rd time I caught my reflection moving a fraction of a second out of sync. Not dramatically, just enough. A delay so small it could be dismissed if you hadn't already learned how fragile reality could be. At night, I dreamed less, but felt watched more. It wasn't a presence in the room. It was farther away than that, broader, like attention sweeping across me occasionally, pausing, then moving on, as if something were checking parameters, ensuring I remained within acceptable limits. I understood then what the observer had meant. Recording wasn't the problem, noticing was. I had crossed from background noise into signal, from unremarkable data into something that required monitoring. And whatever systems governed that process, whatever they were, didn't need to stay visible to exert control. The scariest realization came quietly, without drama. I no longer wanted to show the video to anyone, not because I feared ridicule, but because some instinct older than logic warned me that sharing it would invite scrutiny, not just toward me, but toward anyone who watched it closely enough. The observer had been right. Images propagate, patterns spread. And once you learn how to see between the layers, you can't unlearn it. I was still free, still walking through crowds, still living my life. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, I was no longer unobserved, and somewhere beyond my perception, something was deciding how long that would remain acceptable. By the fourth day, I stopped pretending I could go back to normal. I still went to work. I still answered emails. I nodded at colleagues and laughed at the right moments. But everything felt staged, like a set built around me while the real machinery hummed just out of view. I moved carefully, consciously, aware that even the smallest action might register somewhere it hadn't before. The video haunted me. I didn't open it again at first. I told myself I didn't need to. I already knew what it contained, or rather, what it refused to contain. Proof without clarity, evidence without explanation. The worst possible combination for a mind like mine. But restraint erodes. On the fourth night, unable to sleep, I sat at my desk with the lights off, the glow of my monitor the only illumination in the room. The city outside was quiet, rain tapping softly against the window. I connected my phone to my computer and copied the file into a new folder, isolated from everything else. No cloud sync, no backups, or so I thought. I stared at the file name for a long time before opening it. When the video played on a larger screen, the effect was worse. The image jittered and warped, but not randomly. There was a rhythm to the distortion, like breathing. The static wasn't uniform either. It clustered, forming darker pockets that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I paused the video. For a split second, I thought I saw depth. Not a picture of something, but into something. Layers stacked behind the frozen frame like reflections trapped inside glass. My temples throbbed. I rubbed my eyes and told myself it was exhaustion. Then the audio started playing on its own. A low hum filled the room, exactly like the one I'd felt on the road. Not loud, but invasive. It vibrated through the desk, through the chair, through me. I slapped the spacebar, heart racing. The sound stopped. I stared at the screen, pulse hammering, sweat prickling along my spine. "That's not possible," I whispered. The cursor moved, just slightly. I hadn't touched the mouse. A new window opened over the video player. Plain text, no interface, no visible program running it. Black background, white letters, the same stark simplicity as the message I'd seen days earlier. Prolonged analysis is discouraged. My breath caught. I scanned my task manager. Nothing unusual, no unknown processes, no spikes. The system looked clean. "Who's there?" I asked the empty room, hating how small my voice sounded. The text changed. "This file is not designed for iterative review." "That's my choice," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. For several seconds, nothing happened. I thought perhaps I'd imagined the text entirely. Then another line appeared. Your nervous system disagrees. A sudden wave of dizziness hit me. I grabbed the edge of the desk as the room tilted slightly, reality slipping just enough to trigger panic. Stop, I said aloud. If you can hear me, stop! The hum returned, faint but unmistakable. My monitor flickered, brightness dipping and flaring without input. In the reflection of the dark screen, I thought I saw movement behind me. I didn't turn around. You are not in danger, the text appeared. You are experiencing proximity effects. That's not reassuring, I muttered. The words on the screen shifted again, slower this time, as if whatever was composing them were choosing carefully. Observation creates resonance. Resonance attracts attention. A chill ran through me. You said not to record, I said. You never said I couldn't watch. The response came almost immediately. Distinction noted. Error acknowledged. My stomach dropped. Error. The video resumed on its own. This time the static parted briefly, just a fraction of a second, and I saw something that made my breath leave my lungs. Not a being, a structure. Vast, layered, angular in ways that made my eyes ache. It wasn't floating in space or standing on the road. It felt adjacent to everything, overlapping reality rather than occupying it. A scaffold behind the world, humming with the same low vibration that now filled my room. I slammed the laptop shut. Silence. I sat there, shaking, hands clenched into fists, afraid to open it again, afraid of what would happen if I didn't. When I finally did, minutes later, the computer was normal. Desktop background, open tabs, no text, no video playing. The file was still there, untouched, as if nothing had happened. But something had. I knew that now. The observer hadn't lied. Exposure wasn't the danger. Engagement was. Looking once was an accident. Looking again was a decision. And decisions, it seemed, carried weight beyond my understanding. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt the same distant awareness I'd felt before, but stronger, closer, like a tension narrowing in, drawn by a frequency I had tuned myself into. I finally understood what the file was. Not evidence, an interface. And the more I interacted with it, the more whatever lay beyond the layers learned how to interact with me, which meant there was only one question left to answer. Had I already gone too far? I didn't sleep that night, not even for a few minutes. Every time I closed my eyes, my thoughts drifted back to that structure, those impossible angles layered behind reality like scaffolding holding the world together. I stopped trying to rest and simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building breathe around me. At some point before dawn, I realized something had changed. The feeling of being observed was no longer distant, it was immediate. Not like eyes on me, but like attention passing through me, sampling, adjusting, then lingering just long enough to make my skin prickle. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and whispered, "I'm awake." The pressure eased slightly. That was when I understood the worst possible truth. Whatever was monitoring me knew when I was conscious. I went about my morning on autopilot. Shower, coffee, clothes. Each action felt rehearsed, like I was following a script written for someone else. The city outside my window looked normal, but my perception of it had shifted. I noticed patterns everywhere, timing in traffic lights, people stopping at crosswalks simultaneously, phones lighting up in unison. I knew rationally that patterns exist whether you look for them or not, but once you start seeing them, they start seeing you back. At work, the interference escalated. My computer lagged whenever I opened certain files, never consistently, never enough to justify a complaint. Emails arrived twice, messages sent themselves without attachments. At one point my screen froze entirely, then refreshed to a blank document with a single sentence typed neatly at the top. "You are approaching threshold." My hands went cold. I closed the document, it vanished. No trace, no autosave. I stood up abruptly, heart racing, drawing curious glances from co-workers. I muttered something about feeling unwell and left early, ignoring the concerned looks. I didn't trust myself to speak without saying something that would confirm I was losing control. On the walk home, it happened again. A woman passed me on the pavement, phone pressed to her ear. As we crossed paths, she lowered it slightly and said, without looking at me, "Stop reviewing the file." She kept walking. I turned, pulse roaring in my ears. She didn't look back. She didn't react. She finished her call, laughed, and disappeared into the crowd. That was when fear gave way to something else, understanding. They didn't need to appear anymore. They didn't need fog or remote roads or distorted silhouettes. They had found quieter, more efficient channels, systems built by humans. Mouths that didn't know what they were saying, devices that didn't know what they were transmitting. I went straight home and unplugged everything. Laptop, router, phone charger. I even pulled the fuse box, plunging the flat into silence and darkness. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, breathing hard, waiting to feel something. For a while, there was nothing. Then the hum returned. Not loud, not painful, intimate. It wasn't coming from the walls or the floor. It was inside my skull, a resonance that seemed to align my thoughts into neat, orderly rows. And then the thoughts weren't entirely mine. You have demonstrated persistence, something conveyed, not in words but in meaning. Persistence invites clarification. "I don't want clarification," I said aloud. "I want to be left alone." A pause. "Isolation is not neutrality," came the response. "Withdrawal is still a state." I squeezed my eyes shut. "What do you want from me?" Another pause, longer, heavier. "We want stability." The word echoed inside me, resonating with something primal. "You said recording creates problems," I said. I stopped. "You did not," it replied calmly. "You continued analysis. You continued engagement." "I deleted nothing," I whispered. "Deletion is irrelevant," it answered. "Interpretation is the vector." The realization hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the video. It was what the video had taught me how to see. "You're not going to erase me," I said, more statement than question. "Correct," it replied. "You are now indexed." That word terrified me more than any threat could have. Indexed, filed, categorized, accessible. "What happens now?" I asked. The hum softened, almost gentle. "Now you will experience attenuation," it said. "Reduced exposure, diminished anomalies." Relief surged through me, brief and dangerous. "Because I complied?" I asked. Another pause. "Because you are no longer escalating," it replied. "But you are not exempt." I slumped against the wall, exhausted beyond measure. "And the others?" I asked quietly. "The ones like me?" This time the answer was immediate. Most adapt. A small number disseminate. Those individuals are managed. Managed. The hum began to fade, withdrawing like a tide. The pressure lifted. My thoughts felt quieter, less aligned. Before it fully receded, one final message pressed itself into my awareness. Do not seek confirmation. Do not create patterns. Do not teach others how to see, because once you do, the system doesn't just observe, it responds. The lights flickered back on as power returned to the flat, the world snapping back into place with brutal normality. Traffic outside, a siren in the distance, someone laughing. I sat there for a long time, shaking, knowing one thing with absolute certainty. They hadn't silenced me, they had contained me. And containment only works as long as what's contained remembers the rules. For weeks after that night, nothing happened. And that was the point. No messages on screens, no voices through strangers, no hum in my skull. The world settled back into its familiar rhythm with unsettling precision, like a system that had corrected an error and resumed normal operation. I went to work, I slept, I spoke to friends, I even laughed, real laughter, not the brittle kind born of nerves. On the surface, I was fine. But silence, I learned, can be louder than any warning. The file remained on my devices. I didn't delete it, I didn't open it, I didn't move it. I treated it the way you treat something unstable, by pretending it isn't there while never forgetting exactly where it is. Sometimes late at night, I'd glance at the folder and feel that old instinctive tightening in my chest, as if my attention alone might trigger something. It never did. That was the cruel brilliance of it. I started to notice how carefully my thoughts avoided certain paths, how questions died halfway formed, how curiosity, the very thing that had driven me my entire life, now met invisible resistance, like fingers brushing an electric fence just hard enough to warn, not enough to injure. I understood then what attenuation really meant. Not ignorance, compliance. The hardest part wasn't fear. Fear fades. The hardest part was knowing I could never again be certain which thoughts were entirely my own, whether my restraint was wisdom or guidance, whether the rules I followed were chosen or reinforced. I stopped searching for stories like mine, not because they weren't there, but because I recognized the patterns instantly when I stumbled across them. Fragmented accounts, distorted videos, witnesses who sounded reasonable until they were dismissed as unstable. People who noticed too much, then vanished from the conversation, not physically, but socially, buried under ridicule, algorithms, and distraction, managed, just as I had been told. So why am I telling this now? Because something has changed again, not dramatically, not enough to trigger alarms, just enough. Over the past few days, I've felt it. The same distant awareness, faint but unmistakable, not focused on me alone anymore, broader, diffuse, as if attention were spreading thinner across a growing surface. I think there are more of us now, more variables, more people noticing inconsistencies, more recordings, more interfaces disguised as accidents, glitches, curiosities. The system still responds, but it's doing so more carefully, quietly, at scale, and systems under strain behave differently. I haven't been contacted again, not directly, no voices, no text, but I've learned to recognize indirect signals, delays where there shouldn't be delays, synchronizations that feel rehearsed, moments when the world pauses just long enough to make you wonder if it's checking itself. I don't believe they're hostile. That's the uncomfortable truth. Hostility would be simpler, easier to fight, easier to warn against. What frightens me is that they're procedural. They don't hate us. They don't love us. They don't need to conquer us. They manage complexity. And humanity right now is becoming very complex. I'm telling this story in the only way I believe is still possible. Fragmented, incomplete, personal, no clear proof, no definitive images. Nothing that can be cleanly extracted and turned into spectacle, because spectacle invites attention, and attention invites response. If you've listened this far and felt a flicker of recognition, if something in this account made your skin prickle or your thoughts slow, then you already understand the risk. You don't need me to convince you. Conviction isn't the goal. Awareness is. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to notice how you decide what's real. Because the most important thing I learned that night, standing on a forgotten road beneath a sky that didn't care, is this. They don't need to hide forever. They only need to control when and how we see. And once you learn to look between the layers, once you recognize the hum beneath the noise, you face the same choice I did, to record, to share, or to stay quiet and remain manageable. I don't know which choice is right. I only know this. If one day the world starts behaving just slightly differently, if patterns tighten, if silence deepens, if reality feels like it's holding its breath, it won't mean they've arrived. It will mean they've decided it's time to stop pretending they were ever gone. If you stayed until the end, it's because something in this story pulled you in. So now I want to hear from you. Like this video, if you felt the tension. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Share it with someone who questions reality the way you do. And in the comments, write one single word to prove you watched until the end. Observed. Also tell me where you're listening from. Because stories like this aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to be noticed.